Okay, so it's a hobby where you paint tiny space Nazis and tell stories about their glorious triumphs over literal hell. Could this ever actually be mainstream? Let's take it a step further. Can you actually imagine Granny taking her speed-painted, completely competitive AdMech army to the table and deploying them in such a way that she can alpha strike her, casual noob grandson playing with his dinky space wolves or something? Well, yeah, maybe, probably not. But not for the reasons you think. The setting of Warhammer is pretty gnarly. You got weird bioessentialist themes, apologia for autocracy, and more body horror than Tetsuo the Iron Man. Genuinely, the only movie in the world I could not sit all the way through. Well, I hope no one uses that against me. And it is this weird, very imaginative setting that most people believe prevents Warhammer from ever truly going mainstream. Would you ever expect to see this at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday night? It would have to be after The Watershed, at least. And yeah, it's probably not fitting for BBC One, but there are plenty of mainstream outlets that would show Warhammer content. For example, Amazon have on the way a show about Eisenhorn, one of the members of the SS Secret Police. Sorry, I meant the Inquisition. Eisenhorn, of course, being one of the nicer fascist torture men. This show, of course, based on one of the most popular books in the Black Library. There is an appetite for all sorts of IPs to be shown to all sorts of audiences, even if it isn't always appropriate. Anyone else remember running around dressed as Freddy Krueger as a kid during Halloween? He was the scariest Halloween villain of all for us kids. A child sex offender. So I don't think that the problem with Warhammer ever going mainstream is necessarily the setting. It shows up in plenty of video games, people enjoy it, warts and all. And Games Workshop have shown a tendency to make changes to the setting to ensure that it is able to penetrate a larger market. And it is of course in their commercial interests as a corporation to make their products as appealing to as many people as possible. They of course, by their very DNA, want to saturate the market as much as possible. And right now, the setting appeals mostly to a certain demographic, but Games Workshop have been making various strides in order to make it more accessible to other types of people. And this has taken place alongside a larger general trend of accepting nerd hobbies in the mainstream zeitgeist, which has helped Warhammer. So it's not the setting of Warhammer that is really the problem, in my opinion. It can be changed, and it will be. That's not truly preventing Warhammer from going mainstream. And to be frank, most casual players, most people who are just vaguely aware of the hobby generally, they don't really engage enough with the setting to know that Space Marines are emotionally stunted child soldiers who routinely spit acid. Yet here I am, willing to throw it all on the line, ready to say that Warhammer, as it is right now, can never be mainstream. And the reason? Gatekeeping. By Games Workshop. Let me explain. Have you ever heard of a show called Critical Role? I bet you have. This is a show where Matt Mercer takes a number of voice actors and sits them all in a room and they play a game of D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, the role-playing tabletop game. And it gets millions and millions and millions of views. It's so hot right now. And the popularity of this show has coincided with what has become known as the Dungeons and Dragons Renaissance. I really wish I had a floppy hat right now. There's a little bit of a chicken and egg situation here. It's not quite clear who came first, whether or not Dungeons and Dragons became massively popular or Critical Role did first, but both have sort of fed each other. And Critical Role has been vital in offering a pipeline to virgin audiences into the greater Dungeons and Dragons hobby. And it does this by being inspiring. If someone has only ever heard of Dungeons and Dragons and then they watch Critical Role, they come away wanting to play the game. It's infectious, like syphilis. They want to roleplay and fight monsters and do silly accents. And how do they do that? They buy the player's handbook and, well, that's it. They're good to go. Maybe some dice, a pen and paper. Sorted. All you need is your imagination. So long as it's strictly confined to the stat blocks on your page. My dislike of Dungeons and Dragons is bleeding through, I'm sorry. And as a result, there has been an explosion in players for Dungeons & Dragons. And well, now Wizards of the Coast are working with Critical Role to create new expansions. They have taken advantage of their newfound popularity. They have encouraged content creation as a pipeline into the hobby and made it easier than ever to start playing Dungeons & Dragons. So compare Wizards of the Coast's attitude towards content creators with that of Games Workshop. I would say the Games Workshop tolerate content creation at best and actively hamper it at worst. Big Warhammer YouTubers who are exposing new mainstream audiences to Warhammer, like Midwinter Minis, Squidmar, and myself, the third largest Warhammer YouTuber ever. We don't receive any real support from Games Workshop at all. In fact, they actively try to sabotage me, so why not try to help support the channel by checking out my Patreon at patreon.com/discoursminiatures. There you can get early ad-free content and even exclusive live streams. But Games Workshop are so anti-fan content that you get situations like that time when Midwinter Minis' review of Warhammer Plus was demonetized. It was flagged by Games Workshop themselves, manually. The video itself was demonetized as a result. I mean, that's ridiculous. And the reason? Because Guy had the temerity to use footage from Warhammer Plus in his review of Warhammer Plus. Obviously, this did not stand up to any scrutiny whatsoever, but it gives you an idea of the mindset of Games Workshop. Or as another example, take the terrible NDA that Games Workshop are sending out to smaller content creators. An NDA which potentially has a clause preventing smaller content creators from encouraging viewers to play games other than Games Workshop products. The reverberations of that are still yet to be fully seen, but it's not good. And now, with the launch of Warhammer Plus, the Warhammer equivalent of Critical Role, that content that truly appeals to casuals and gets them excited to play in the universes created by a company, has mostly disappeared onto a paid-for platform that most people don't watch. I am of course talking about fan animations, one of the biggest things to have happened in the Warhammer scene over the last 10 years. So overall, I would say the Games Workshop have been a net negative for Warhammer content creation. Except for me, I guess, there's always something new to criticize with them. And this especially sucks because Warhammer has some massive barriers to entry for new hobbyists. Stuff that Dungeons & Dragons just doesn't have to deal with. Now some of these barriers are down to the nature of wargaming. It requires a lot of space, it's an active social hobby. It typically requires plenty of miniatures. And there's a ton of knowledge that new hobbyists need to learn. I mean, just personally, I used to use massive cases with foam inside them in order to transport my miniatures. But then I discovered the secret of magnetizing miniatures for storage and transport. And let me tell you, it was a game changer. But that came with tons of questions with answers that were difficult to discern. What size of magnets fit what bases? How do you magnetize flight stands? Which magnets are strong enough for your precious, expensive miniatures? Luckily, today's sponsor, the Magnet Baron, has you covered. When I first started magnetizing my models, it was really tough to figure out what was needed. But on the magnetbaron.com, everything is laid out so that it makes sense for wargamers. That's right, he's a member of our tribe. From the strongest N52 triple-coated neodymium super magnets for any magnet project, used famously in the Large Hadron Collider, probably, to magnetized movement trays, the Magnet Baron has it all, at a great price. I personally am a huge fan of the magnetic posable flight stands. Yes, these actually exist. And these were super useful for me personally because I recently had to move home and I had to transport a bunch of flimsy, delicate Dark Eldar raiders. If I had used the fragile flight stands that had come with them out of the box, it would have been a horror show. But thanks to the Magnet Baron, my Dark Eldar raiders made it to their new home safe and sound. So now my Dark Eldar can pillage Imperial settlements with plenty of room for their terrified captives. Thanks, Magnet Baron! So don't roam 5-year-old Reddit posts trying to figure out which magnets fit where anymore. Simply go to themagnetbaron.com. Link in the description below. But many of the barriers to entry for Warhammer are a result of Games Workshop's own making. And these are the things that I particularly criticize on this channel. The models are incredibly expensive, the rules are unintuitive, cumbersome, and expensive. The game is aggressively monetized at every opportunity. Games Workshop are constantly rotating in and out content, meaning that it's hard for new players to discern what's relevant to them. You have to continually pay money to maintain access to the most up-to-date rules. Armies are constantly varying erratically in power level. New codices are often incredibly strong and dominate the meta for a couple of weeks to a couple of months, and this leads to players feeling compelled to buy into the latest and greatest. You know, if they want to be competitive. Any mistakes that you make cost you money. Did you buy a suboptimal unit or army? Does it not work the way you expected? Well, too bad. The strategy of the game itself is subservient to the business model that Games Workshop employs. So balance is fiddled with in order to adjust for sales figures, yada yada yada. Games Workshop actively make their games worse in order to encourage spending. Pop all of these problems on top of an already incredibly expensive entrance points, both in terms of time, effort, and money. And yeah, it's no surprise to me that the vast majority of Warhammer hobbyists have never bought a single model. And of those that have never played a game of this war game. And this is what I mean by gatekeeping. Games Workshop gatekeep Warhammer. They exacerbate the barriers to entry that the mini wargaming hobby already has, and they invent a ton of new ones. They're not interested in expanding the hobby. And why? Well, their business model is designed around exploiting a small minority of hobbyists who are 100% committed to spending tons and tons of money on Warhammer. I've said it before, Games Workshop explicitly designed their products and marketing to take advantage of compulsive spenders, neurodivergent hobbyists, and hobbyists with disabilities, aka wheels. That's why you get boxes like Ash Wastes, which cost as much as a games console. You have people from all walks of life from all over the world who are interested in playing Warhammer, and they produce content in boxes like this. This is why people are so frustrated with Games Workshop. They get interested in the setting, in the games they want to play, and then they see this unaffordable box designed for like a small minority of people. And that's why the vast majority of Warhammer content online is about painting. It's because the painting side of this hobby is the only real part that you can get hands-on experience with at a reasonable price point. The only problem is, painting is really hard. To anyone casual at all, painting is difficult, intimidating, and, well, messy. Dungeons and Dragons may be a war game, but it has mostly shaken off the tradition of painting your own miniatures. It's a very small part of that hobby. Most people don't even use miniatures anymore. They use theater of the mind, i.e. no miniatures at all for combat. It's kind of funny, actually. D&D sort of has the inverse population of Warhammer. With Warhammer, 80% of hobbyists have never played a game, but most people have tried their hand at painting a miniature. In D&D, 99% of players have not painted a model, but the vast majority play. And obviously, there's more stuff that goes into this. You can play D&D online easier than you can play Warhammer. No one tell Games Workshop about Tabletop Simulator, please. So sure, Games Workshop can license out their IP for TV shows. They can license out their IP for massive blockbuster games. But they will never have the type of success that Dungeons and Dragons is currently enjoying during its renaissance. Not unless something fundamental changes with Games Workshop's attitude. Otherwise, the foundation to their entire IP will be hollow, it'll be shaky. Most people can't play Warhammer. That is a problem for Warhammer, and it severely limits its appeal outside of the small niche it has created for itself. At one stage, Warhammer may have been able to go mainstream, but that opportunity has already passed us by. It was a few years ago, during the COVID lockdowns. At that stage, it felt like everyone was taking up Warhammer again. The hobby had grown massively. This is when the stock of Games Workshop rose very high. And what has happened since then? Well, Games Workshop have made all the worst choices. They have doubled down on their worst impulses. And as a result, tons of those new hobbyists who might have grown the hobby organically by talking to their friends, they have all felt super alienated by the prices, by the business practices of Games Workshop, and subsequently, they've dropped out. The hobby is smaller again. It's Really sad. And you can see this story told out in the stock price of Games Workshop. It's not the full story, but you can see an element of it there. And that sucks. Games Workshop just didn't ride the wave that Wizards of the Coast did. They didn't lean in to their newfound success. Games Workshop weren't interested in that. And the lesson here is that Games Workshop need to stop seeing players, fans, hobbyists, content creators as just a mere population to exploit. Something other than the enemy. Good news though, the mini wargaming hobby as a whole is healthier than it has ever been. There are a huge variety of games now, and tons of new solo and cooperative games have been coming out over the last few years as well. This, in my opinion, is one of the most important things for this hobby to grow truly accessible. I'm constantly beating that drum, but maybe that's another video for another time. So Warhammer can't be mainstream, but we don't have to be embarrassed by it, do we? Check out this video here to find out. And a big thanks to my patrons, especially Steven Jackson and Earthwormia. And I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye!